Okay, all right. Well, we'll kick this off. Today, what we're going to be talking about is challenges and solutions for designing ePRO and eConsent for pediatric trials. So we're going to be deep diving on the unique considerations around pediatric trials, eClinical, and we're actually going to be talking about some work that Gori and I did together, designing some features for really optimizing ePRO and eConsent in the pediatric space. So before we start, we'll just do some really brief intros for those who don't know us. I'll let Gori go first.
Right. Tom is saving the best for the last. Love it. Thanks, Tom, for having me here today. I'm truly thrilled to co-present with you on a topic that's near and dear to me, and I hope for the rest of the audience here. We talked about what day it was today, so happy Wednesday, everyone. I'm Gori Nagrani. It's obvious I'm on the left-hand side. I'm located in Canada, in Toronto, and I'm the co-founder and co-CEO of Saphira Clinical Research. I would say started off my career as a formulation scientist, and from a formulation scientist, I quickly evolved into a technology and operations enthusiast. I've been in the clinical research space for 20 years, specifically in the e-clinical technology space. I've spent most of my time at pharma and CROs, and my core focus over the 20 years, a little longer than I would have liked, has been eCOA, IRT, eConsent, wearables, amongst other newer and exciting technologies. For those who aren't aware what Saphira does, just a little plug, we work very closely with study teams to ensure the right level of due diligence is performed when working with vendors. And we support teams throughout their entire journey to ensure that they operationalize the technology in a way that's fit for purpose for the protocol. Off late, and this is very exciting for us at Saphira, we have been spending time collecting both quantitative and qualitative data with patient advocates as well as sites. And this has truly been global in nature. And what we're trying to do is just kind of understand what makes the product sticky, what works well, what isn't working well, besides the product, just the operational experience, so that together as a community and as an industry, we can push the needle forward. I think we are in need of this, and we need to do it better, and this will help us and faster, specifically to advance medicines. So, Tom, long introduction, but thank you again for having me on, and I'll pass it over to you.
Sure. I'll be quick. My name's Tom. I'm the founder and CEO here at CureBase. Been running the company since we started about 6.5 years ago. Our mission has always been to bring modern technology and great user experiences into the clinical research space. And we've been working with Saphira in an advisory capacity for a little bit now. So excited to share together. Cool. In terms of what we're going to be talking about today, there's a lot to cover, but there's going to be two main areas. The first, we're going to dive into general considerations around eClinical and pediatric studies. So talking about what you need to be aware of in terms of things that are uniquely challenging for the staff, for the patients, for their families, as well as things that are uniquely challenging around the technology and the compliance needs. And then we're actually going to deep dive into some software design that we did together. We've been working with Gori and her firm on actually implementing some important features to optimize ePRO and eCOA for pediatrics. So we're going to kind of walk you through in a fun way the design process and the technology considerations that we made when we made those new features together. And throughout the presentation, feel free to leave questions in the chat. We will process and round up those questions. We'll be getting to them at the end. But if something pops into your head that you want us to talk about towards the end, just throw it in the chat and we will get to it. Before we do start, we're going to do a quick poll. So this is going to be a simple question. I'll throw it up right now. But basically, do you have experience conducting pediatric trials? I'm going to open that poll. We'll launch it, and we will find out.
I just tested the system. I can't vote, so that's good. System passes, Tom.
It's okay. We can probably guess the answer. All right. Well, I'm going to end the poll. Thank you, everybody. The results are that 75% yes, so 75% of the people on the call have experience running pediatric trials, 25% don't. So we are going to be speaking to a well-informed audience. So thank you. Cool. So we'll get started. The first thing I want to talk about and ask you, Gory, is just in your experience, what makes pediatrics such a challenge for participants and sites, and what are some of the unique difficulties that those participants and sites encounter in the studies that you've been involved in?
Okay, yeah, sure. Um, we only have a couple of minutes here to go through this. There's definitely a lot of different challenges. I think what I'll cover through is just top five, if we may. And so I think some of them are, number one that hits my mind is the socioeconomic factors. So as we think about families, families are very invested in clinical trials. I think one of the unique aspects here within pediatric trials is it's not just the child participating. You have the entire family that get involved. It's quite a large commitment. And so they may have financial constraints, lack of resources and support. And as you can imagine, with all of that, that poses a challenge. The other piece is trust. I've heard and kind of through our research is, can the families trust the sponsoring companies? Can they trust that they're doing it right, that they don't have other motivations? That's definitely a huge one. We've also spoken to families where we've heard about negative experience and or unethical practices, which, as you can imagine, that creates a bias that and fear for them to actually participate in a clinical trial. The environment of the ecosystem that the family lives in, we have to remember that, you could have more than one child within the family. So how is this impacting their daily lives? As you guys are all aware, if you're giving the attention to one sibling, what happens to the other sibling? They feel left out, and just kind of overall sort of impact to other siblings, and their entire life sometimes is disrupted with the participation in a clinical trial. Logistics is another key thing. I think all of you guys are aware too, with COVID, we've kind of accelerated on the remote trials, but there are instances where with pediatric trials, they're far and few between, and they actually have to travel long distances to get to the site. So again, that will have an impact on the overall participation. The next piece is, this is really, really important, and this is the emotional aspect. So as a parent, you do go through the emotional pieces where, you think, is this the right thing I'm doing for my child? Is this the right trial? And am I making the right informed decision? And how is this impacting not just the child that's going through the clinical trial, but most importantly, is the other sibling, how, what impact is that having on their emotional well-being? And then last but not least is on the actual data privacy and confidentiality side. It's a hot topic everywhere. So, how is my data being collected? Is it being collected in a compliant fashion? Where is it being stored? How is it going to be used? So those are some of the challenges for a pediatric trial.
Yeah, definitely agree on all those. I mean, I've got a 2-year-old, and I can imagine if she had a health situation, and you got to decide how to deal with the health situation, but you've also got to consider, someone's asking you, can you be in a clinical trial? Can you submit data? Can you sign this consent? Just all the challenges of being in a normal clinical trial kind of get exacerbated. And then also privacy as well. In terms of the overall family experience, I mean, can you dig a little deeper into that and just some of maybe the friction? Also on the technology side, if this is more of a remote type of pediatric study, where you are maybe using an app and things like that, what types of challenges might the family experience just logistically with the technology, et cetera?
Yeah, so this is a good one, Tom. I think from a logistics standpoint, we want to make sure that they don't actually have to go into the sites, right? So they can actually, and we've experienced this during COVID, and we've seen that a lot of these pieces have remained to be sticky within our daily life. So we have, the Amazons of the world, the Ubers, DoorDash, etc., right? So we don't want to actually go to the restaurant and pick up food. We want to make sure that, the food can come to the patient. So similarly here, I think the key thing is, to allow flexibility within the technology so that they can collect the data on site, but also more importantly is that the data can be collected off site in a fashion that is conducive within the clinical trial.
Yeah, I think since it's more difficult to have a pediatric study where there's multiple family members, you're juggling different kids, et cetera, I think just even anything that can make the situation easier for everybody is even more important than in an adult-only single participant trial. So I think anything with technology to make it simpler, with the logistics of the study plan, flexibility, totally agree. It's just even more important to make it as easy as possible.
Yeah, and I think the other thing too is I bring this up, BYOD, I think Willie's ears will be ringing here, but I think just kind of bringing your own device that, just kind of thinking about real life, we don't want to have different phones for different participants. And if we have our own phone, we want to be able to use it. Where humans are creatures of habit and we want to use our phone and use the app. And so this way, it's a seamless and frictionless experience for all.
Yeah, not to mention if everything is provisioned, you could end up with a situation where you have multiple provision devices for one family. One provision device seems hard enough.
Correct.
I'm trying to imagine three if you have parents and kids involved.
Correct. Yeah, absolutely.
So that sounds extra fun. I think a lot of this maps towards enrollment. So there's obviously challenges in participation, which is, actually getting to the site and submitting data and all the friction and drop-off points that can come. That affects compliance, that affects retention. So you want to solve those. On the enrollment side, I mean, what have you seen in terms of getting people to actually want to participate, to actually want to enroll, to go through the consenting and sign-up process and not drop off as they start to think more about the study? I mean, what have you seen that's been a challenge and what has worked to sort of mitigate some of that?
Yeah, this is a good one, Tom. As we know, the number one problem within the industry is enrollment. Specifically, now, if you think about adult trials, there's a large number. And now, as we think of pediatric trials, there's a smaller subset. There are fewer pediatric trials. And specifically now, if we add into competing trials, and then we throw in rare conditions, the subset gets smaller and smaller. So we already have the competition within the clinical trial space, and that makes it even more difficult. And then now let's throw in, all of these other operational aspects. You have the devices, the complex consent process, the time commitment. This is a huge time commitment. Travel, I don't want to sound like a broken record, but travel is definitely key because as part of our whole diversity inclusion as well initiative, we want to make sure we're including, as many patients as possible, different locations, demographics, etc. And then more importantly is the age appropriate communication. And by that, I mean, depending on the age of the child, do we decide to use just plain paper? I say paper that has been sort of migrated into electronic format. Do we use that just text, or do we use videos? Do we use other multimedia, photos, images, things like that, to make sure that truly the participants and family, again, I always link them together because the main sort of glue is the parent, right? We need to make sure that they are bought in,
Yeah.
which is going to drive the enrollment piece, that they really understand what they're signing up for, and so that they're not withdrawing consent midway, and that we're able to retain them, and that overall will lead to good high quality data and compliance.
Yeah, definitely. And in most of the studies we've done that do involve recruitment for pediatrics, it's usually directed at the parents. And a lot of our studies have been remote. These have been studies in areas that are things like rare disease, et cetera, or maybe it's remote recruitment. You're reaching out to people off of lists of folks that have that condition, et cetera. So there is some direct patient outreach. It's usually to the parent. I am curious, have you seen that mostly for your case? Is that it's the parents signing up Or have you also seen situations where there is any communication in that earliest stages of recruitment with, an adolescent or with someone a little younger?
Yeah, I think it's been both, Tom. It just really depends on the age and the type of trial we're looking at. But at the end of the day, I think, as we talk about sort of participant or patient centricity and site centricity, and there's a sort of battle between, the two at this time. It's similarly here with the patient, no matter what it is, with the parent, no
Mhm.
matter what it is, we do need to make sure that we absolutely have their buy-in, which will drive this entire process. Because
Mhm.
I think the one thing we need to remember is that informed consent is just not, a digital format and that they just have to read through it. It's an actual process to make sure that they are well informed and they're making that decision collectively.
Yeah, no matter what, the consent's going to be signed by the parents. So whether you reach
Correct.
out or initially engage someone who's a little younger or over 18, it's going to have to lead to full buy-in from the whole family, experiences for both of those age groups, and ultimately a full, well-informed consent that involves the parent.
Correct. Yeah.
Cool. Well, I think I'm going to pivot a little bit towards compliance. So I think there's two things that make pediatrics difficult. One is just the general circumstances of, getting a whole family to buy in, dealing with the health considerations for your child, the logistics. But the other part is just that it is more challenging on the compliance side in terms of privacy, in terms of auditability. So, when you're thinking about technology uniquely in pediatrics and 21 CFR Part 11, what are kind of the first things popping into your head and that people need to be thinking about?
This is actually, I won't say strangely, but this is the first question we get asked when we look through sort of vendor evaluation, audits, inspections. And, I'm sure you guys are aware, but there's a lot of FDA guidance around this, as well as the recent a couple of years anyways, that there was this eConsent paper with the question and answers by the FDA. What we want to do is ensure that the system is compliant, 21 CFR Part 11. So we have the electronic signatures, the type of electronic signatures, and whether they are acceptable in countries, and the audit trail, right? Who is making, if anything, who's actually made the original entry, if there's a data change, who's making the entry, and why, the reason for the modification within the system. And then also, most importantly, is the username and password, the identification of and authentication. So this becomes very, very interesting with pediatric trials, because you could have two parents live exactly who has made the entry. Okay, I hear my audio is cutting
Yeah,
out.
I think I lost you for about 10 seconds. So might want to rewind 10, 15 seconds.
Okay, can you guys hear me now?
I can hear you. Yeah.
Yeah, okay. So I think, so let me go back to the complexity side of things. Tom, just checking you guys can.
It's still a little choppy. Yeah, still a little choppy, but it's okay.
Just challenging me to see how tech savvy I am here on the fly. So give me a second.
Yeah, I think we're doing
It
okay
should
now.
be. Okay, or is this better now?
For the moment, we've got it.
Okay, perfect. All right, just put your hand up and just let me know when you can't hear me. So I think just kind of back to the complexity side of things, we could have two parents who are living in two different homes, two siblings participating in the clinical trial, and living separate homes. And then to add to the complexity, they could be shifting homes. weekly, bi-weekly, whatever it may be, but that's just what life is, and that's what life presents sometimes. And so how do we best deal with that to make sure we understand who is actually making the entry? Does that make sense?
Yeah, any data that goes into the system has to be 100% tied back to, who was it
Correct.
specifically with.
Correct. We don't want to be sharing passwords between, mother, father, accounts and things like that. So, those are the things specifically with pediatric trials, that's where it becomes very important.
And what have you seen sort of evolving in the industry, going back some number of years? What types of solutions have you seen out there that kind of address this, this need for the data to be traced back? And how have some, vendors in the past kind of handled account sharing and things like that?
I've seen a combination of things. I've seen email addresses. I think just to kind of overarch, I don't think any, I won't say all, I'll be shut here, but I think just there is room for improvement across the board. So two things I've seen. Number one is unique email and password, and we need to make sure that it's linked to the actual right person. But then also I've seen the use of PIN codes.
Got it. And is there any material difference between a PIN code password, or is it as long as you're getting that form of authentication and it's tied back to the right user, then it does the job?
It does the job. I think it's just a matter of preference. PIN codes are just easier to remember, quicker to go through. PIN codes, even with the biometric sort of authentication, versus actually typing in your email and, password and things like that. So I think it's just a preference.
Yeah. And we'll come back to this when we show our actual technology implementation later in the presentation and how we solve for this. But yeah, I totally agree with you, Gori. I mean, the most important things are tracing everything back to the right user. So if data is coming from two different devices or two different users, that everything in the audit log is there. And that also once those people are in the system to enter that data or sign a consent, that full part 11 that they had multiple forms of authentication and it really was them that was on the other end. And I guess that is one other thing to be aware of, is just that when you're dealing with young kids and parents, there is more opportunity for password sharing and things like that. So it's something you got to be mindful of.
Yeah, definitely. We need to think about being empathetic here because there's a lot of different moving parts here.
Yeah. Kids don't usually buy their own phone and and all of that. So there is more of a culture of parents kind of managing their kids' apps and things like that to be navigating. And I guess the other thing there is just that, there's a big difference between a 17-year-old and a 12-year-old and a 2-year-old. I think it's a lot easier to manage someone like imagine a 17-year-old or a 16-year-old really taking control of their participation, logging in, having their own phone, being able to navigate all of the study information. I think it's a lot easier to picture that 16-year-old or 17-year-old doing that as opposed to a 12-year-old who probably needs a ton of help. They're more dependent on their parents. And then there's even kids that wouldn't even be able to use a phone. So how do you think about that when you're kind of thinking about study design and about technology recommendations about how to do this?
Yeah, I think it's we need to think about again the age appropriate content. So whether we use images or multimedia, which is going to help with the engagement, right? The engagement and the review of the materials that eventually will drive again the enrollment and the retention. But I think the biggest thing is we need to think about this and plan ahead, right? So we need to ensure that the system is flexible. And one thing to bear in mind is change management, right? Things can change. You could add a family member, you could add a child, remove, etc. So I think the main thing is to make sure that we can make the changes fairly quickly.
Mhm.
And way, it's a seamless experience when we're thinking ahead and not after the fact of, oh, what if this happened or what if that happened? So
Yeah.
at least you're covering all of the different aspects.
And the IRB is usually pretty helpful for that. I think that in our experience, you're usually submitting multiple versions of maybe the same information, especially if it's patient-facing communication. And if it is a study that involves an app where there's participant notifications, there's pre-screeners, there's information for participants, it's not uncommon to submit different versions to the IRB, and they can be a part of that
Correct.
process. I don't know if you've probably seen that. and that can be
I
very helpful.
have. It's another. I'm definitely very passionate about IRBs and screenshots, and that requires a whole nother session here. But I think just in short, um, we've actually been doing a lot of work with the IRBs and ECs, with Advara specifically in WCG, and we're working towards creating standards, actually with eConsent, for instance. If you send in screenshots, Advara actually will charge you more. They do not need screenshots, and just so that I can plug this here, because the more the merrier. The same thing with ePRO. They do not need screenshots, and I think everybody has. We're trying to debunk the myth here that we need screenshots. There are, I have to say, there are certain people who are still under the impression that screenshots are needed. There are certain IRBs, Latin America, Asia, for instance, South Africa, actually, we've had recent experience in Uganda and South Africa, where they've really asked us for the screenshots. And so it was just a matter of us. We could have just quickly said, oh, okay, yeah, we need to get the screenshots. And as we're all aware, screenshots are always on the critical path. That's the first thing we want out the door. But we actually spent time, worked with them to educate them and make them aware of, what the other large IRBs are doing, and to understand and rationalize with them as to why they need these. So, mission accomplished. We actually did not need to submit the screenshots, but as you can imagine, you need to spend time, and again, you have all these tight timelines that you're running against. So, just the screenshot plug here, that we do not need the screenshots, and we are working continuously. There's other forums. I sit on the EU forum as well, for eConsent, but amongst others, ePRO, where we're literally trying to drive the industry so that we do not need these screenshots, and we can kind of build standards or give IRBs sort of insights into systems where they've already seen the standard material. So if they've seen the standard material, all they need to do is see very study specific aspects of it, which, with eConsent as an example, that doesn't change too much besides the actual content of the ICFs.
Yeah, absolutely. One area where we've seen a lot of variation across the age is obviously the assent. It's not uncommon for us to have multiple assent forms requested by our sponsors for different age groups. And we've also seen different ages sometimes as kind of a cutoff point where we even need to provide assent. When you're thinking about, the adult 18 or older is always going to provide the full informed consent. But then the assent form kind of takes on a different role. Someone under 7, this is one thing we did for a recent study, under 7, there's an assumption that they can't even sign the assent. They're not of an age where they could fully comprehend that. From 7 towards adolescence, they get a different version of the assent where they are expected. I mean, what have you seen in terms of the expectations for assenting for someone who's under 7, someone who's over 7, and then also the difference between, maybe a young adolescent and someone who's closer to 16, 17?
Yeah, very similar, Tom, to what you say is, we do want to make sure as we think through, and again, I'm going to pivot to the technology side of things, is that we need to make sure that we have the different levels, right? So the different ages, but then more importantly is on top of the assent, we actually have the parent, the guardian, or witness, LAR, legal authoritative representative. So just we need to just make sure, again, within the system, that we do have the flexibility, which is going to allow that.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay. And then the last thing I guess we'll get to before we dive into sort of the technology design part of what we're talking about and actually sharing what we've built together, would just be about the different regulatory requirements, state by state, country by country. What have you seen that kind of varies in terms of pediatric consenting, ePRO, any of these eClinical types of technologies from one state to another, and then from one country to another?
Yeah, all I've seen is we have many lists across. I'm sure everybody can, this resonates with everybody. There is no one list. And actually, I've compared the lists across the board, with whatever vendors we actually work with. And there isn't, even if you look at just ACRO and other forums, there isn't really a one-to-one. I think it just depends on kind of your experience. And as you can imagine, things evolve very rapidly across the board. From a regulatory standpoint, we did talk about screenshots, so that hopefully will be the one thing that we remember here. But besides screenshots, there is the electronic signatures and the acceptability per country for electronic signatures. That's one thing. And then the other aspect is the actual requirements, right? So for instance, the health authorities, the national requirements, as well as the IRB and EC requirements. So we have a lot of different requirements that we need to follow through. Within specifically Europe, I mean, you guys are familiar with the regulations. We have the EU CTR, which that's relatively recent, so we need to abide with that. We have GDPR, which again, hopefully everyone's familiar with that. But then more importantly is the actual state by state, even within Europe, that there are differences. So we need to abide with those. The US, we have obviously the FDA, we have HIPAA, we have within California, we have the California Bill of Rights and things like that, which we definitely need to abide with. So that's the number one before we're even thinking of, this is really important, before we're even thinking about implementing eConsent. Because if electronic signatures are not allowed, then we need to think about paper, which paper, I hate to bring up paper, but this is just the reality of the situation where wedding signature is required. And then we need to think about the mechanism of actually transcribing or bringing the paper, if it's required, into the system so that we have all of that data flow which could plug into from eConsent into eCOA or IRT or downstream into a data lake, which is now used for further analysis. So just some of the things to consider when you think about even implementing eCOA and specifically eConsent.
Yeah, absolutely. And the good news also with the consent is that if you are submitting to different IRBs, there'll be different sites in different states, particularly in the US. And if there are special different requirements, each state and will have its own, the IRB will be able to provide some feedback on that and make sure that the consenting process works out well. So
yeah. And the good news is the list is actually growing, so it's getting better with the acceptability of electronic signatures. So fingers crossed we continue to move in that direction.
that's good. Okay, well, we're going to pivot a little bit. That kind of concludes some of the overview considerations. We are going to deep dive into the actual technology implementation that we had been working on together. We'll share you some screenshots and kind of walk through what design choices we made while building out our pediatric feature set at Curebase with the help of Corey and Saphira Partners. Before we start digging into that, we are just going to do one more poll. This one's a slightly different question. What's important in a technology? I'm going to pull up the poll right now. And the exact question is, when considering technology for your pediatric trial, how do you rank the following in terms of importance? And there's a few options there.
I've been told, Tom, that you need to share the results button.
I launched poll too. No, it's open. People can submit. We have one submission. If you're in the LinkedIn Live crowd, you probably won't be able to submit unless you have some magic powers that I don't know about. But if you're in the Zoom crowd, you can fill out the poll.
This is a tough one. How come we don't have all of the above?
It's a multi-select. I think you can
I know.
as many as you want.
Oh.
I don't want to bias anybody by saying how the results are turning out. So I'll wait. This is clinical research. We don't want to bias anybody. Are all of the poll questions of the same height?
the spacing and they centered. I see this very unimportant. The T is at the bottom. That's not great. T's on the next line.
I think we're a little too deep on eCOA inside jokes.
That's right.
Okay, well, we got 75% submissions, so I'm going to end the poll and we will share the results. So in terms of what we have here, the most important is user experience, actually. So I'm very happy to hear that because it's not 100% what I would have expected. Number two from there is site and participant reminders, which is actually a big part of user experience. And then after that is real-time reporting. The smallest one is actually fast study build launch. So user experience crowd, I think that's not surprising given that we're talking about pediatric studies, which we talked about are particularly challenging for the users, and it's easier to see drop off and recruitment challenges. And then also, everything being in that vein of reminders, which will even be more challenging when you've got multiple people involved. And we're talking about app-based studies that involve consenting and data collection directly from the participants. So user experience, site and participant reminders, number one, and then the study build launch, less of a priority. So thanks, guys.
Yeah, thanks. This definitely resonates with us, Tom.
We like user experience. We like to know that people care about it. So that's good to know. Cool. So yeah, Gory, I'll pass it back to you.
Okay, all right. So I get to ask Tom questions. This is great. I like this part of the presentation. So Tom, I think we spoke about this earlier in terms of CFR Part 11 and some of the challenges, and often I think I mentioned earlier is, how is this possible within the system as we think about, we're shifting gears now to the product, and what is Curebase been doing to ensure that we have all of the aspects of Part 11?
Yeah, so when we were puzzling through the right design, we basically saw two different options. One was kind of like a bit of a Netflix style where multiple people can log into a single experience. And then the other option, which was ultimately one we chose, was fully separate login information. So unique email, unique passwords. Those two have design trade-offs. The idea of it's very easy to log into Netflix. You just click a button and you're in, but that's also kind of the compliance issue, is that it's not easy to separate the parents from the children and know with certainty that those are going to be the right users. So we ultimately chose to implement full multi-user support, meaning that a child can have their own email and password authentication, a parent can have their own email password authentication, a legal guardian, but all of those people can be connected to a shared participant profile. So they'll have some visibility about what the other members of their account are doing. So the parents will be able to see, that the patient, that their kid has enrolled or what stage of the study they're at, for example, and that they might be able to do some of those activities for them, things that are logistical, signing the consent. So there is a shared sense of an account, but everybody has their own unique login. And again, the main requirements to me with Part 11 from a technology perspective are one, that when data is submitted, you're 100% sure with two means of authentication that it was the right person. So, in EDC systems, that's traditionally been re-entering your password. And then additionally, that it's all fully auditable. So for us, having fully separate accounts but connected ended up being the right solution. I don't know if you have any comments on that as well. I know we talked about it through the design process and the alternate approach.
Yeah, it's Tom, as I mentioned, I think that is actually it is needed, and it's actually a breath of fresh air. I think we need to again kind of think about the flexibility, and this was one very important feature as we think through pediatric trials. And perhaps Tom, maybe you can kind of maybe next slide and just. Oh, I thought you had a screenshot. Sorry, my bad. Okay, yeah, so maybe we'll just get to that later. I know, Tom, we were going to get to that. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so I know earlier I did speak about some of the challenges, Tom, with just family members and, real life and how it presents and different people playing different roles. How do you ensure, and what is Curebase doing to ensure that the overall experience is streamlined, it's frictionless, just pain-free? And, per the poll, everybody, the most important thing was user experience. So maybe you can describe some of the work you've been doing on
Yeah,
your
definitely.
product.
Yeah, so jumping ahead, basically came up with we basically came up with a way for folks to sign up that was very remote first. One of the unique considerations we had was, our studies and folks that work with Curebase, they tend to like the app-based studies. They're looking for something that does allow for direct-to-patient sign up, which is actually even more challenging than just, site-based. In a site-based pediatric study, the staff can kind of oversee things, make sure things are happening appropriately, but you have to imagine say you're reaching out to people over an email blast, or you're reaching out to families through a list that comes from, an advocacy group or something like that. They're getting a link, they're going online, and they don't have, a coordinator right there with them. So the first thing we kind of looked at was the sign up experience, and we designed a sign up experience that starts with folks, maybe coming from that email blast or that outreach list or the direct outreach. They're entering their information, but then they actually get to say who they are as a member of this, family. Are they participating? So are they actually going to be the participant? Are they signing up on behalf of somebody else? And if they are signing up on behalf of somebody else, who, what is the age of that person, and are they going to be able to create an account? So the first thing we ask people is basically, who are you in the study? Are you participating? Are you participating on behalf of someone else? And then it kind of guides you through every question from there. We just tried to make it really easy, step by step, giving them exactly the opportunity to complete that sign up process. So if you say that you're signing up with someone who's over 7, it'll ask you, who are you in relationship to them? What's their email, contact information? If they're under 7, then it won't ask you those questions. So it's just giving you what you need to complete the sign up process. And if there is going to be someone else participating, they basically receive an email and a welcome opportunity to sign up. So if you're the parent, you sign up on behalf of your kid, you put in their email, they're going to then get that email, they're going to be able to sign up, and you're both going to be able to access kind of a shared participant profile in the mobile app. And that's kind of how that works. So, within a pretty simple set of what might take 5 minutes, you've got 2 people logged in, and each of them has access to a shared profile, but they might be able to complete different activities. Maybe the parent can only the parent can complete the consent document, but the child can review it, or they can start to look at the study plan, et cetera. So yeah, just when you look at that, what are your thoughts on kind of the overall experience?
Yeah, I think the overall experience, Tom, and maybe I'm biased here, but I think just it's simple, it's easy to use, and that's what everybody needs. I think if you just back up to the slide that you had earlier, if you kind of look through it, it's not very busy. You have what the relationship is, you have the name, email. So it's very, very, it sort of mimics what a commercial grade app would look like. It's not very busy. And what I like here specifically, this is kind of getting into the details, is even just the font size. So the font size you can actually increase and decrease some minor detail, but I think something that, again, it syncs and it resonates with what we do in our personal life with our other apps that we use on a daily basis.
Yeah, I think the idea of consumer grade experience is something that we try to champion. It's not easy because in clinical research, you're balancing, ultra compliance needs, and those always obviously have to come first. But there is a way to, if you pursue it, to pursue that consumer grade experience. And again, for pediatrics, and remote pediatrics, it's kind of the ultimate challenge, kind of, because there's the most opportunities for people to get frustrated, to get confused, to drop off, and just anything you can do to avoid some of that confusion, make it kind of spoon feed the sign up steps is very helpful.
Yep.
Yeah. And then in terms of the actual sign up, once you do get access to that participant profile, there is also the idea of which actions are for which people. So what we kind of came up with was the idea of 2 basic ways of restricting activities. One was to restrict to the primary data submission user. So basically, we saw this from a lot of sponsors where they might be running a study where there are different possible age ranges, and based on that age, different people might actually be submitting the data. So in a single study, there might be 2-year-olds, there might be 12-year-olds, there might be adults. So you actually have these study designs that might be like that. It's common in, sort of things like rare disease research or that type of research where you might be looking for a broad set of people. And in those, you basically have to say, there's 3 people on account, which one of them is actually going to be submitting the data. So we created that opportunity. And then you can actually configure the study to say which activities are only for this primary data submission user. So I guess just thinking about that, have you seen those kind of use cases out in, when working with sponsors, et cetera, and what do you think about it?
Yeah, absolutely. We absolutely have seen this. We have seen instances where we've seen multiple participants and within the same family actually participate in the clinical trial. We've seen, a witness, LAR, and so here it's just important to understand who is doing what when, if that makes sense. And that here, at least, again, back to sort of thinking ahead so that we're not during the study thinking, oops, how do we do this now?
Yeah.
And I think this is really important. And I think the really good piece here is that it's configurable. So it's quick and easy to do.
Yeah. And there's a lot of gotchas, which you can kind of gloss over, but you shouldn't. So for example, we thought the participant is not always the one submitting data, right? So you could have it say, whoever's the participant, they're going to be the one who submits the data, but that's not actually always true. There are situations where the participant is, 12 and the parent is submitting on their behalf. But there's also situations where the participant might be 16, they have a shared account with their parent, but they're old enough that they're actually submitting the data. So the idea is, it's not actually always the participant that's submitting their data. Within one study, it could be there is a dedicated user, and based on the age range, you have to be able to say who is that going to be. And if you don't do that in an automated way, then you kind of open the risk for data to be misentered, et cetera. If you don't actually really guide the users and say this data must be submitted by the person who's designated, you can end up with a situation where the wrong person submitting, or God forbid, different people are submitting, say there's a week 1 ePRO and a week 8 ePRO, you would hate to have a situation where one user submitted the first one, a different user submitted the second one, and then you kind of have to clean that up. So our approach was basically, try to really lock down the system to guide exactly the behavior you want, and make sure that you don't have to go back and play cleanup later down the road.
That's would love it, just to sort of avoid the variability between the users.
Yeah. If a user can do something, they will do it, has been our experience. So the more we can guide, especially in the remote app-based studies, the better. I'll jump ahead a little bit, just to the next step, which is a little bit more focused on consent. So I'll pass it back to you.
Yeah, sure. So we've seen sort of different age ranges, less than 7, less than 12, so basically 8 to 12, and then 13 and up, right? We have all of these different age ranges and just making sure that the workflow, again, sort of tying it back to user experience and the age appropriate content, right? So what have you been doing, Tom, to just make sure that that workflow is seamless and it's most importantly accurate?
Yeah, so our approach has really been a lot around configurability. Basically, what we implemented is 2 main ways to configure a document. One is just the signing order. Your typical consent document might have a 3-signature sort of line. So there's a parent or a legal guardian signing, there's a child signing, and then there's a counter signature from the study team. So on the left, we kind of are showing our configuration experience for who's going to sign the document. The assent would just be signed by the child, so that would usually be a single line. So you set up those documents, but then also we do have to plan for different documents going to different children based on what state they're in, based on what age they are, or they might not even get it at all. So in Curebase, basically, we can have our documents deployed. The documents go to the users based on kind of a custom, special logic. So it says, if they're under 7, they don't get any assent document at all. If they're between 7 and 12, they get document A. If they're between 12 and 17, they get document B. And then again, of course, if they're over 17, if they're an adult, then we don't do the assent at all. So we've really invested in that configurability in terms of who's signing, and then also which documents are getting presented to which people. And it's really hard to predict what the rules are going to be because, different sponsors and different IRBs it might not be 7, it might be 8, it might be 9. And we've seen other rules. For example, we've seen situations where if the child has some sort of cognitive impairment, or if there's actually a reason why they can't sign the assent, it's not just their age. There may be other reasons why they can't sign the assent. So you need to really bear in mind those when you're writing these kind of like custom functions and deciding who's going to get the document.
Yeah, that's a great point, Tom. Yeah.
Yep. And then for the actual signature, one thing that's been on my mind is just, for a child, what is the best way for them to actually provide that signature? At Curebase, we do support two signature methods. We support what is just the absolute gold standard, kind of familiar from the EDC world, which is just re-enter your password whenever you do anything. So we do support that, where you re-enter your password, you're already in an authenticated session, so there's multiple layers of authentication. We do also support a hand-drawn signature. I mean, in your experience, when you're deciding, which of these to use, what feels best, and is that vary based on the situation?
Yeah, Tom, it just really depends on the situation. Again, it sort of comes down to preference.
Hmm.
And I think just sometimes, I mean, we've been part of some studies where, in particular, France has been mentioned. And I think it goes back to sort of education and awareness with France, specifically, sort of just the privacy piece, GDPR, again, that I mentioned earlier. They're slowly turning the corner around that, but just things that we need to kind of bear in mind, the preference piece as well. But again, at the end of the day, it's the regulatory side that we also need to bear in mind.
Yeah, that does sound right. And there's multiple ways to achieve Part 11 compliance. Passwords work. The important thing is to have multiple layers of authentication and to do it from an authenticated session. So yeah, definitely room for variation here. One thing we will say is that the passwords lead often to just, especially in remote studies, we found that they do prevent some errors, because when you do the hand drawn, people can sometimes not draw something that actually is their real signature. So I think we have a slight preference for the password base, just provides fewer opportunities where you might need to do some cleanup later down the road.
I think, Tom, again, back to sort of flexibility, and really at the end of the day, it should be, we need to give patients a choice, or
Yeah.
participants a choice to keep using that. We can't just sort of force one way. And this is, we talk about, again, provision devices, BYOD. So again, sort of just making sure we have the flexibility and we give them the choice, and that is going to drive the compliance and high data quality.
Yeah, that is a really good point. I totally agree. Flexibility is everything. It's challenging in a system. It creates the opportunity for a lot of different ways that the participant can participate. It requires a huge amount of configurability. But you can do that, and that's kind of the approach we've pursued. Okay.
Okay, just a reminder, we have 5 minutes here, so
Yeah.
we'll just have to speak fast, Tom.
We'll wrap it.
So
Good.
here, so we all love this change management. We plan everything per plan, but then, hey, guess what? We need to change protocol amendments, changes to the families, relationships, things like that. So, what have you been doing on the product side to think about or consider change management?
Yeah, so change management is always going to happen. There's also just the opportunity for folks to make a mistake. Similar to with the data entry, our experience has been that people will make mistakes also on the sign up onboarding process. They'll, say that their kid is, their kid is over 7, under 7. They might click the button in a certain way. They might say, I'm going to be the data submission user, but then actually it's not supposed to be that way. So there's a need for corrections, and that basically means empowering the study team. So we have the remote only workflow, which is, participants getting the communication, they're signing up, they're saying, am I the parent, am I the kid? They're inviting their kid. So they're doing all those things in a self-directed way, but there's also staff experience to kind of manage that. So they can add additional users, they could remove a user, they could change the relationship. So say, that's actually wasn't a parent, that's a legal guardian, or they could say, oh, it's not actually supposed to be the parent who's submitting data. I think based on the kid's age, we're going to have them do the submission. So ultimately, we've kind of taken an approach that has automation and workflow restriction for that remote workflow, making it something where the patient can sign up on their own. But then ultimately, it also empowers the study team to have the final say, to make those changes, invite more people, remove accounts, and kind of have the best of both worlds.
Yep, that makes sense. And again, I think just back to configurability and doing it quickly and easily. That's a key thing here.
I think
All
this is
right.
the
The best for the last, as we say. This is really this is a topic that's been of very huge interest across as we talk to sponsors. And again, this is a there's a cultural aspect, and then there's a country specific aspect. For example, in China, they love WeChat. Asia, I can say they love WhatsApp. Here, SMS notifications, etc. So just kind of bearing that in mind and sort of giving options, user experience, things like that. We know, the notifications are going to help with ensuring participants remain engaged, especially for longer trials, but more importantly, compliant. So, Tom, shed some light. What have you been doing on the product side?
Yeah, I mean, I think the biggest thing that we noticed that was different with pediatrics is there's obviously more people on the shared account. So, we've supported notifications for things like survey reminders, consent notifications, things like that for a long time. I think what's different with pediatrics is that which notifications go to which people. And also, are there notification preferences? Should the parent and the kid have a say in which one of us is going to get the notifications? So we did a couple things. One is again, in that onboarding workflow, we allowed for notification preferences. So, the parent can say, I want to get notifications, or the kid can say, I want it, or both. And then also saying on the individual notifications, who are they supposed to go to? So you can say, is it push text or email? We don't have WeChat at the moment, but it's a good idea. And then also saying who's supposed to get them. Is this for the primary data submission user? Is this a child-only notification? Is this for both people? So I think the biggest thing that we had to add was just those notification preferences. And then also saying, are some of these notifications really destined for a specific group of people? Is this a parent-only notification, a child-only notification? So it's an extra layer of configurability, but ultimately that's what you have to do because you're designing a study that has different people, each playing a different role, and you just can't send the notifications to everybody.
Yeah, I love that, Tom. I think I hate to bring this up here, but with Amazon, I'm a huge consumer of Amazon, and I love the flexibility with even just the return process. You can get the receipt via different email, help desk. You can call via call or email. If you're traveling, you don't want to now you've switched your data off. You don't want to receive text messages. Now you want to switch your preference to email, things like that. So at least again, this is, I think, huge. This is huge, where it's very different to a lot of the platforms that I've seen. And again, it really, really, truly resonates with real life and what we experience in real life. I'm not an SMS fan, and so I like to use WhatsApp and email. But yeah, I think this is truly, truly huge, and I think just even having the option, right? Sometimes, the parents don't want the reminders actually going to the actual child for some reason. And so at least this way, that it's only going to come to the specific person. And then, you have time windows where these notifications can come through for people who are, shift workers, things like that. This becomes very important.
Yeah, and the threat of consumer grade, comparing it to Amazon, I mean, that is where we want to take things, and I think that's where the industry wants to take things. It's always a challenge when you're also balancing compliance and all the different users and staff experience, but I think that is where we see things going and where we're trying to make our impact. Okay, well, we are coming to the end of the time, so we're going to switch over to Q&A. Before we do that, we do have one more poll, which is actually just a little insight into who would like follow-up from the Curebase team. So I'm going to launch that really quickly. For those folks who are on the Zoom version, if you could just let us know on the poll, yes, get in touch, or no thanks.
And I think, Tom, we're actually over time. I think it may make sense, if you're okay with it, if we can actually respond to the questions by email. I unfortunately do have a hard stop.
All right, well, for those who ask questions, we will answer your questions over email. We have them. Sorry we ran a bit long, but I appreciate everybody coming to share with us, see what we have to share today, learn a little bit about the technology design, about pediatrics. we really appreciate you coming, and we will answer your questions directly over email. So thank you so much. Please enjoy the rest of your day, and thank you, Corey, for joining me.
Thank you. Thank you, Tom. Always a pleasure, and have a great day.
You too.
Thank you.